in so many different ways. Um, she was formally trained as an ecologist and science educator, and her passion for adding habitat value to developed landscapes has led her to launch native plants to the people in March of 22. You have to say it that way. Everybody now knows, okay? Her missions are to increase the local availability of diverse native plants and help people actively engage with the natural world through presentations about native plants and wildlife, pollinator ecology, and sustainable landscaping. Prior to launching her native plant business, Sharleen worked for 9 years as a marine ecologist for the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, previously working in nonprofit medical research. And this is the scariest one as a high school teacher, science teacher. I mean, I was a police officer, and that's the scary one, right? Um, Teaching has once again become a key part of her work life. This year, Sharleen developed and taught a semester-long applied ecology class at the College of Charleston. It's called Managing Landscapes for Biodiversity. And she's also begun teaching classes for Clemson's Certificate in Native Plant Studies. One of the things that I love about Sharleen is she's at the end of her all of her emails, and sign up to get her email if you don't already. She writes that it's her both her mission and her joy to do what she's doing, providing native plants and educating people. And I just think that that's a wonderful thing, and we're so lucky to have her. So thank you, Sharleen.
Well, thank you very much, Debbie. I am excited to be able to share a presentation on wasps tonight because it takes a special audience to want to hear about wasps and native plants for an entire hour plus. And I think this is the right audience. These are my naturalist, fellow naturalist people. So thank you for coming tonight. And I will just get started. So I will say all these photos have been taken by me in my backyard, my front yard, Francis Marion National Forest, places like that, except for one that I will point out. And I absolutely adore native plants, pollinators of all kind, critters of all kind, including those that predate upon pollinators. And these guys, the pollinating wasps, are both predators and pollinators. So they kind of play multiple roles in our yards.
Is this
and
too loud? No, no.
oh, trying to get myself to the next slide here. There we go. So I have some not so secret missions for tonight. The first is to convince you, that is individual you, to all of you who are here tonight, to start falling in love with South Carolina's wasps. Maybe at least the solitary nesting ones, maybe not the social ones that are more likely to sting you, but there are so many wonderful wasps that are very unlikely to sting you. And we'll talk about those. And yep, most of our wasps are solitary nesters. So those are the ones where every female builds their own nest and lays her own eggs and provides food for her own eggs for once they hatch and turn into larvae. So you don't have the group with the specialist defenders, which are the ones most likely to nab you. So gotta love the solitary wasp. They are beautiful, they are diverse, they have important functions in our ecosystems. And along with the wasp angle, I'm hoping that you will learn to recognize and name some new to you species of South Carolina native wildflowers. So we're going to start just with a little bit of um, organizational description of how all these insects are related to each other. So we're starting with the order Hymenoptera, which
I
includes
listen to this upstairs, Daisy.
Oh, if you could mute yourselves if you're going to talk, that would be great. So we've got Hymenoptera, which is an order, and we've got ants, bees, wasps, and sawflies. Sawflies are kind of their own little branch of this tree, and the other branch includes the ants, bees, and wasps. And then when you're looking at that group, the Apocrypha, you see that we have parasitic wasps, which are kind of their own thing, and the Aculeata, which includes the ants, bees, and stinging wasps. So parasitic wasps are very different from stinging wasps. Then we go into the next level superfamily, and we have ants, which are their own thing. We have bees and apoid wasps. We have cuckoo wasps, spider wasps, foliid wasps, spined wasps, and vespid wasps. So the interesting thing is that wasps are not their own group. They're not a distinct group. They're kind of spread among different things. There's bees that are more closely related to some wasps than they are to other wasps. And the parasitic wasps are less closely related to most wasps than ants are. So some interesting relationships there. So going down to the epifamily level, Anthophylla, which is flower loving, are the bees. And then we've got apoid wasps. We've got families of wasps that we'll be talking about tonight. So Crabronidae, Specidae, Spoliidae, Thynidae, and Vespidae. So as I was mentioning, wasps are not their own group. They're not monophyletic, meaning that you have a common ancestor and everything that descended from that common ancestor as a distinct group. So kind of interesting. You cannot, one application of this is if you go into iNaturalist and you search for wasps, you cannot search for just wasps. You have to choose a superfamily of wasps or something like that. Okay, so stinging wasps versus parasitic wasps. So parasitic wasps and sawflies, so those are those early branches in the tree, use their ovipositor to lay eggs inside the larval host organism. So that can be in insects, in the case of parasitic wasps, or in plant leaves or needles, in the case of sawflies. And then once you get to that other branch of the tree, the aculeata, the ants, bees, and stinging wasps, the ovipositor has been modified into a sting. So only the females of these species has a sting because it was modified from an ovipositor, which the males did not have. And stings are used for injecting venom. And venom can paralyze prey, or it can cause a potential predator of your nest to go running, one would hope. So eggs are laid now from an abdominal opening near the base of the sting. So it's still nearby, but not the sting itself. And social wasps use their sting for nest defense. On the other hand, solitary wasps, they still have the sting, and they primarily use their sting to incapacitate prey. So life cycle quickly, we've got this group of insects undergoes complete metamorphosis, which means that they go from the egg hatches into a larva. The larva kind of looks like a grub. Then the larva eats and eats and eats all the food that was provided by its mother at the time of egg laying. And once it reaches its last instar, it becomes a pupa or forms a cocoon. This is all still in the nest. So we never see the larval stage unless you're breaking open the nest of a wasp. And then after a complete metamorphosis, out emerges the adult wasp. So males and females, males are basically like completely focused on taking care of themselves in terms of providing food and finding a mate or several mates. On the other hand, females take on all of the responsibilities for nest construction, if they construct a nest, as well as larval provisioning, which is gathering food for their young. And males just have a simplistic life. They are looking for the females and feeding themselves. So interesting thing about some insects is the females mate and then they store and maintain viable sperm in a specific organ in their body called the spermatheca. So in the case of many wasps and some bees, they can maintain that sperm in a viable state for months before they actually cause fertilization to occur so that they can lay viable eggs. So one other kind of interesting thing biologically is all Hymenoptera, so this is the ants, the sawflies, the bees, the wasps, have something called a haplodiploid sex determination system. What that means is the males are haploid. They develop from unfertilized eggs, so it's just the female component. And females develop from fertilized eggs, so they are diploid. They have genetic components from both their mother and their father. So nesting strategies. Once again, we've got diversity here. So you can have no nest. And there are species where the adult female paralyzes the prey, deposits an egg on the prey, and leaves. And that's it. She's done her job. She's produced her egg and she's provided food for her young. Usually, yep, so she's paralyzed the prey. So she doesn't have to worry about whatever that prey item is kind of shaking off her young larva after it hatches. And she just does that over and over again until she dies. And the young are set up to feed and pupate and metamorphose. Then there are solitary nests, where a single female wasp completes all of the nest-related tasks. So that's constructing the nest, provisioning the nest with food, and laying eggs. And this is the most common strategy for wasp species in our area. Then there's like what wasps are known for, which are the social nests. So in that case, generally a single egg-laying female produces multiple generations of young in a single year, starting with worker wasps who help her out. So males and the next year's foundress females, so these are females that are going to found a new nest, are produced later in the season. And the males and females mate in the fall, and then the males die, most of the females die, and it's just those foundress females that maintain the sperm inside their spermatheca and overwinter and then start everything over again once the weather warms in spring. So in a social nest, each worker has a specialized role. So that can include brood rearing, feeding the young, caring for the young, foraging, and that's for prey items, for water, for wood pulp to build the nest, or nest defense, our least favorite wasps. So we're going to go through each of these groups of different nesting types, and we're going to talk about some common examples of wasps that are pollinating and that are stinging, so these are not the parasitic wasps. And so we're going to start off with the ones who are simplest. They are no nesters. They are parasitoids. So in all of these cases, females locate a scarab beetle larva, also known as a grub, underground. They dig down to it. They inject venom through their sting to paralyze it, lay an egg on the paralyzed grub, and then depart. So here are 3 different species in the family Scoliidae who use this no nesting strategy. So on the left, we've got noble scoliid. On the middle, we've got 2-spotted scoliid. And on the right, we have feather-legged scoliid. So these are ones that I see in my garden quite frequently. So for the first one, the noble scoliid, these are pretty small, as for all 3 of these, that no nest, and they provision their young with a single underground paralyzed scarab beetle larva. So here's what they look like on my all-time favorite pollinator plant, which is clustered mountain mint. And the one on the upper left is a male, and the one on the right is a female. And often the females are harassed while eating by males who are hoping to pass on their genes to the next generation. So what I'll be doing is for each of these slides, I'll have the name of the wasp up top, and then I'll include the name of the plant, both common name and scientific or botanical name. So I encourage you to engage probably with yourself muted with the plant ID game. So I'm going to ask you and there's going to be a lot of repetition. So if you don't know the plants up front, that is perfectly fine, but hopefully you'll learn at least a few of them as we go through this presentation. So as I click on a slide before I reveal the plant ID, see if you can come up with it on your own, especially later on in this presentation. So here we are continuing with the noble scoliid wasp. You can see it's a pretty small wasp. And this plant is, drumroll, sweet pepper bush, also known as coastal sweet pepper bush or summer sweet. Clethra alnifolia is one of our species in that group. And this is very popular with a lot of different pollinators, but particularly wasps. Here we have an annual flowering plant that is just starting to bloom now. This is fleabane. There are many species in the Erigeron genus that all go by the common name fleabane, and there are specific ones like oakleaf fleabane and that sort of thing. Here we have a ground cover species that can tolerate saltwater flooding, can tolerate freshwater flooding, can tolerate drought. It is in the verbena family. Pollinators love the nectar from verbena family plants. And it's a very tough plant. This can be walked on, it can be driven on, it can be in abandoned gas station parking lots. I've seen it there. This is turkey tangle frog fruit, Phyllonotiflora. A great ground cover, great to mix with your lawn if you have weak patches of lawn, much more valuable than turf grass. Here is one that I think many of you will know. It is a gorgeous giant flower, and it is a vine. It is the larval host plant for the Gulf fritillary, and it is purple passion flower, also known as maypop. It has edible fruit, and if you step on the fruit, it makes a popping sound. I think that is why it is called maypop. It can start producing fruit as early as May, but usually later. And then here is another larval host plant. This provides food for the caterpillars of the monarch butterfly. And this is swamp milkweed. Then we've got a plant that has an unfortunate name because it was used to induce sneezing in cases like snuff, when people had, I don't know, congestion or something. So this was medicinally used to induce sneezing. It does not generally cause sneezing when you just walk by it, but it is called sneezeweed. I prefer to call it Helen's flower. And then here we have orange coneflower. And this is one of our Rudbeckias. So that's kind of the black-eyed Susan group, and there's a number of different species in that group. So this is all the same wasp that's kind of showing you examples of our native flowers that this wasp visits and helps to pollinate. So one more here. This is a very important group of species. It provides food for caterpillars of over 100 species of moths and butterflies. Blooms in the fall and is not an allergen to humans. Goldenrod, solidago. So very, very important group of taxa because it produces lots of caterpillars, and caterpillars are needed to feed to songbird nestlings. Okay, so that was our first wasp, and we're going to now go through the next no-nester wasp species, which is the two-spotted asclepiad. And this is a larger species. They do the same thing. They provision their young with a single underground paralyzed scarab beetle larva grub. And they specialize specifically on June bugs, which are also known as green June beetles. And this is a pest of turf grass. So we have a lot of them because we have a lot of turf grass. So this species of wasp benefits from the fact that we have a lot of turf grass, but I encourage you to reduce the amount of turf grass so that we can have more native species and more native pollinators. So the larvae of June beetles or June bugs eat the roots of the grass. So a lot of people use beneficial nematodes in their soil or various toxic pesticides to kill June beetle grubs. Or you can just have this beneficial parasitoid wasp help knock down your larva population. So this is a wonderful flower that blooms in late summer, early fall. It is in the mint family. And its showiest feature tends to be the bracts, which are below the flowers. There are rings of flowers above the bracts that are tubular and speckled. And this is spotted bee balm. So the spotted part is the speckling of the tubular flowers, and bee balm is just the group of Monarda genus plants. Then we've got a shrub, and the shrub produces both male plants and female plants. And the male plants are especially valuable to pollinators because they produce both pollen and nectar. The female plants only produce nectar. And this is a male plant, I believe. So here, I'm kind of questioning myself. I think this is a female plant, actually. So this is only a nectar source. This is groundsel tree, also known as sea myrtle, also known as baccharis. So a tree with many names, a small, kind of a large shrub, small tree. And it is very popular with pollinators. It blooms in the early fall, just as the monarchs are starting to migrate south along the coast. So its timing is very good for monarchs, but many, many other species of pollinators will visit the small flowers of this species. People generally don't notice the flowers because they're not showy, but they produce a lot of nectar. The male flowers produce a lot of pollen, and the female plants, once they're pollinated, will produce seeds that create little tufts of white floating seeds. That's how they disperse the next generation away from the parent plant so that they're not competing with each other. And here we're in another very important taxa for caterpillar production and songbird food. This is an aster. Specifically, it is frost aster. And a single frost aster plant can produce over 1,000 blooms in its second year of life. It is a remarkably productive plant. It blooms in late October into early November. I love having, about 5 different species of aster in my yard because you can just stack them on top of each other in terms of bloom season and get a bloom from early October into early December. Here we have a repeat. This is one of our black-eyed Susans. specifically Rudbeckia fulgida, the orange coneflower. And we have another repeat here. So this is goldenrod in the genus Solidago. So this is our third species of no-nesting wasp, feather-legged scoliid, and they do have very feathery legs, lots of hairs off of them, which is good for a pollinator species because it can capture and distribute pollen from one flower to the next as it's flying around getting nectar. So, by the way, bees visit flowers for both pollen and nectar, but wasps only go for the nectar generally. There are always exceptions as biology, but um, bees are basically vegetarian wasps. So the wasps, for their protein, are eating insects. For bees, they do not eat other insects. They feed on the protein source of pollen. But the wasps, they're just going for the energy hit from the nectar. So the feather-legged scoliid wasp also is feeding on the scarab beetle larvae, and they dig down, the females dig down to find one, sting it, lay their egg, and let things proceed from there. So this is a fun fall blooming vine that has these clusters of small white and pink flowers called climbing hemp vine. I often see it along tidal rivers, climbing up shrubs that are on the banks of the tidal creeks or rivers. Mecania scandens is the name. This is a very common mint family plant in Francis Marion National Forest. It likes kind of moist, part sun, part shade, and is musky mint, Piptis alata. So you can see on the right kind of a close-up of one flower, and it tends to be a very leggy sort of plant with at the node where two leaves come off, you often have one or two flower buds that then blooms from that same node. Here we have a fun group of plants that has a name that is somewhat misleading in terms of its medicinal use. It is called rattlesnake master. So it used to be thought that rattlesnake master could be used to treat a snake bite, but they tried that clinically, didn't work so well. So just appreciate it for its pollinator value rather than anything else. This is Eryngium yuccifolium, so its leaves look like yucca, very strappy with a little bit of serration along the edge. And there are quite a few other species of Eryngium that actually have blue flowers and are also native to this area. So the feather-legged scoliid wasp, later on we will see one of its fun behaviors, which is that even though it's a wasp, which you would think would be intimidating enough, I often see them hold their rear legs above their head while they're feeding on a flower. And I was looking up, like, what is the reason for this behavior? And one person speculated that it makes them look more like a spider and for defensive purposes. And I'm like, is a spider really more intimidating than a wasp? I'm not sure. So I'm still kind of curious about that one. Here we have a repeat species. This is a small shrub, and it is sweet pepperbush or summer sweet. We have a small tree, large shrub that can grow in the water or next to the water. It is at Caw. We definitely saw it when we were in class for the Master Naturalist course. This is common buttonbush, Cephalanthus occidentalis. Then we have another fall blooming plant, and here you see the legs being held above the head. This is a behavior I see very frequently with this species of wasp and pretty much no other species of wasp. It's pretty diagnostic for this guy. This is a genus called Eupatorium. Individual species in that genus are known as bonesets or thoroughworts, the fall bloomer. And then here we have another mint with that kind of characteristic ring of flowers around the stem, but no bracts really that are here. And tiny little flowers, tubular. Wasps tend to have short tongues, meaning they can't reach into a long tubular flower unless they can climb into that tube. So they need kind of accessible nectar in order to be able to benefit from it in order to pollinate the flowers. So this is white water horehound, a Lycophis species, tends to live in swampy habitats, which is why it's a water horehound. And then this is, okay, I have a lot of favorite plants, but this is one of my favorite plants that grows in my yard. It's known by a few different names. One of them is named after the white and black flecks that you see, so salt and pepper plant. Another name is snow square stem. And with a name like square stem, you might think, square stem means mint, but this is misleading because biology is messy. This is actually in the aster family. And it has those clusters of small flowers all in that one group. And you can see once again, the back legs are held over the head. So it's trying to imitate a spider, according to some people. And then this is a petite little shrub that is named after a state that is only within a small part of its range. This is New Jersey tea, Ceanothus. And boy, when this little shrub blooms, the diversity of pollinators that comes to visit the flowers is incredible. So it really must have some good floral resources to share with insects. This is something that has weed in its name. I mean, a lot of native plants have weed in its common name. And we have invasive species of this group, but this is actually a native species of smartweed, Persicaria. So there is a pink flowering species that has bristles at the nodes, and that one is not native, but this is one of our several native species of smartweed. And that grows in the marsh that you can see from the boardwalk at Caw Caw. So, and also may grow as a quote unquote weed in your yard, but I've come to appreciate it because I have noticed pollinators visiting those flowers. Here is a later stage mountain mint. This is what it looks like. So it blooms all summer long, starts in early June, usually goes through the end of August, but towards the end of August, it's looking like this. So you have these rings of flowers and they just keep going further and further out. And in this case, it has been blooming for a long time, for a couple months plus. And so it has this interesting, set of seeds that is developing or fruits that's developing from those pollinated flowers. And they're just new buds and new flowers on the outside ring always. So here is a repeat. This is that August to September flowering mint that has the colorful bracts, sometimes bright pink, in this case, a little bit more muted pink. And this is spotted bee balm. And you can see the buds on the kind of middle right. So pretty much all these mints, they have those rings of flowers that are gradually blooming over time, kind of up or around. This is actually a member of the milkweed family, but it is not an Asclepias, which is the genus of milkweeds. This is called Indian hemp or dogbane, because it is toxic to dogs. So you shouldn't let your dog eat the leaves. Pretty much all of our Asclepias species do have cardioglycosates or I forget what the name is, but it's a heart toxin within the tissues. So humans should not eat Asclepias or anything in the milkweed family. And for some reason, they chose specifically dogs should not eat this species, but it can be used to produce hemp. So the Native Americans in this area used it to produce fibers for weaving into clothing, baskets, that sort of thing, I believe. But cute little flowers, and pollinators tend to visit. And then here is a repeat. And this one is the male. Okay, the one that I showed you before was the female. So there's pollen and nectar on this individual plant. And it is sea myrtle, groundsel tree, baccharis. Goes by all those names. Blooms in the fall. And then here is a very early spring bloomer that is a large tree. And this is the male flower. They tend to be male or female plants. And it is a red maple, Acer rubrum, which sadly is the favorite target of the Asian longhorn beetle. The larvae bore into the vascular tissue of the red maple trees and kill the trees, and then spread through the next generation to neighboring trees. So we had that pop up near the Stono River on the south side of the peninsula, and we had it pop up in Mount Pleasant. And so the only treatment in that case is to identify infected trees, to cut them down, and to chip them. So that is no fun. So if you see a whole bunch of bored holes into a red maple, please alert the South Carolina Forestry Commission as soon as possible so that they can send a team to investigate and make sure as few red maples have to perish as possible. There's been a lot of educational outreach about the Asian longhorn beetle in our area, and so far it has been almost entirely contained. One of the most destructive ways that it gets spread around, and it's a way that people often don't think, is through moving firewood. So the larvae can be in pieces of firewood, and then you transport the firewood to another place. You don't burn it right away, and the larvae metamorphose, emerge as adults, go out, breed, and lay eggs on a new tree, and then you've moved that firewood, hundreds of miles in some cases, and introduced a new population of that invasive species. So please do not move firewood, especially if you are in a quarantine area for an invasive species such as the Asian longhorn beetle. But I love red maples. They're very important early blooming source for early pollinators. Here we have another aster, whole bunch of asters, as I mentioned. This one's called Elliott's aster. Symphyotricum is the genus of North American asters. This one is a late blooming aster. It blooms in November, sometimes even into December. So really good extender of the bloom season in your yard to support pollinators through that whole period. This is a cute little plant that when I was doing a bumblebee survey for the Xerces Society, you're supposed to go out and basically go a 2-acre area, document every species of plant that is in bloom, and then spend 45 minutes actively searching for bumblebees, collect them with a net, put them in a vial, put the vial into a cooler with ice, wait 10 minutes, and then photograph the bee while it is cool and chilled and not moving very fast because they're cold-blooded. So then you let them warm up and they fly off and they're unharmed. One of the Xerces Society Bumblebee Atlas surveys that I did, this was the #1 plant that I found bumblebees on, and this is winged loosestrife. It is not related to purple loosestrife if you're from the Northeast and are familiar with that invasive species. This is a native species of loosestrife, Lythrum alatum, that is very abundant in some places in roadsides of Francis Marion National Forest. It likes kind of the moist areas along the ditches along the side of the road, and presumably natural wetlands as well. Now, as I promised, this is a blue flowering species of a group of a native plant. It is a rattlesnake master. There's Eryngium ravenellii, there's Eryngium integrifolium, there's a prostrate, tiny little, almost weedy rattlesnake master. All of them have different shades of blue and different kind of bracts underneath those clusters of flowers. So here, once again, that behavior with just one leg instead of two going above the head for the feather-legged scoliate wasp. This is a repeat of a well-loved flower in our area, which is the purple passion flower, Passiflora incarnata. And this is what I call psychedelic purple ditchweed, also known as blue mist flower. I'm not sure why they call it blue. To my eyes, it is purple, but a very aggressively spreading plant that loves ditches and loves yards and will spread by seed and by underground runner. Goes completely dormant in the winter, but in early fall, it is in bloom. It is gorgeous, and all sorts of pollinators will come visit. And once again, that legs above the head posture. And then this is a tall species of wildflower that likes moisture. Beautiful clusters of purple flowers. And this is tall ironweed, Vernonia gigantea. We also have New York ironweed, which is native here, despite, once again, the New York versus New Jersey common name. So common names are often misleading. And this is a smaller purple clustered flower known as blazing star. One flower stalk can be like 3 feet long for this plant. It's pretty spectacular. And butterflies in particular really love the flowers of blazing star. And then this is a carnivorous bog plant. And the bloom, it's not a carnivorous plant itself, but it grows amongst pitcher plants and sundews. This is called milkwort, tall pine barren milkwort specifically. And if you remember the field trip to Florida Bay, Carolina Bay and Francis Marion, this is probably a photo from there of the feather-legged scoliate wasp visiting the milkwort flower. Okay, this is the unfairly named plant, which is Helen's flower or sneezeweed. Sneezeweed is the unfair name. Helen's flower is my preference. And okay, we haven't seen this one yet, but I love this plant. So many native plant gardeners have a pass-along plant, which is swamp sunflower. And that it can be a bit of a beast. It will spread through underground runners very aggressively. And it blooms for like 3 or 4 weeks. And when it's blooming, it's fantastic. But it can be very tall and top heavy and flop over when it's in bloom. This is a wildflower that is clumping and blooms for about 4 months instead of 4 weeks, and is very popular with bumblebees and butterflies and our feather-legged ciliate wasp. This is known as starry rosinweed, Silphium. There's another plant that is in the same genus called the cup plant. And the cup plant actually, its leaves at the stem, at the node, are cupped upwards and will hold water from rain. And so that is the reason for its name. This silphium, this rosinweed, does not have that feature, but it has fantastic flowers that are really popular with pollinators. And it's a clumper, so much easier to manage than the swamp sunflower that spreads. And another repeat of this very important group of species, the goldenrod. Okay, so we are now moving on to another family of wasps that is also a no-nester. This is the family Thynidae or thynid flower wasps, and the genus that we'll be looking at is New World banded thynid wasps in the genus Misenum. So same thing, they love beetle grubs. That is what the mother will seek out, and she'll be listener informed. She'll dig down to a beetle grub, and she will lay her egg after paralyzing that grub. So here, this is a repeat. This is a vine, fall blooming, climbing hemp vine, Mecania scandens. And I just want to wanted to point out that for this group of wasps in the genus Misenum, the females are way bigger than the males. And in particular, their abdomen is much larger than the male abdomen. So that was a female that we saw right there. And here we see a male. And it's a little confusing because it looks like it has kind of a stinger sticking out from the end of its abdomen. And we know males do not have stingers because stingers are modified ovipositors. But it is actually a pseudo stinger. It is decorative and not functional. You cannot be damaged by that. So this is a male of the thynid wasp feeding on my favorite pollinator plant, the clustered mountain mint. And this is earlier in the season, so you can see that the flowers are emerging from kind of the center, the top. There's buds in the outside that will be opening up gradually over the coming 2.5 months or so. And this is another repeat, another one in the mint family. This is the top of the stalk instead of the middle of the stalk, which we saw before. This is musky mint, Hyptis. And here we see both a male and female together. So those females, they can't have a snack without getting harassed by men. And here we have a female on the left and a male on the right visiting spotted bee balm, Monarda punctata. So female and male. So look at the diameter of their abdomens. It's very, very noticeable difference between the two. But when you look at the coloration, very similar, especially if you look on the thorax, you've got the head, the thorax, and the abdomen are the three body sections of insects. And if you look at the thorax markings, very similar between those two. Here we have the state named little shrub, where the state is far away from us, but this is still a native shrub here in South Carolina. This is New Jersey tea. It is a deciduous shrub, a cute little guy. And this is a male. You can see the pseudo stinger coming off the tip of his abdomen, very narrow abdomen as well. And a lot of wasps enjoy visiting umbelliferous flowers, which are these clusters of small, tiny little flowers arranged in a specific pattern. So carrots do this, fennel does this, various herbs, parsley, if you allow it to flower, will produce a flower that looks like this. So this is a flowering umbel structure. And I'm not sure what species this is. It might be cowbane, which is one of our native swamp Apiaceae species. So this plant belongs to the family Apiaceae, which includes native swamp wildflowers, as well as carrots and parsley, which are not native to our area, but are widely utilized in gardens. And then this is a plant with an awesome name, sandbog death camas. So in Europe, there is a plant that looks somewhat similar to this called camas, which is edible. And apparently, when colonists came over to North America and they saw this plant at a certain stage early in spring, they're like, oh, that looks like camas. And they would dig up the root and they would eat the root and it would be toxic. So not good. So sandbog death camas, it lives in boggy habitats, kind of that carnivorous plant habitat where you find the pitcher plants and the sundews. And it's gorgeous, you know, it's a pretty unique plant, but don't eat it, which the common name is accurate in that way. Here is another tiny little wildflower. You almost wouldn't notice it. This is the male, little pseudo stinger, feeding on corn pod. Very small little wildflower. And this is a giant flower structure. It is our native plant with the largest leaf, which has leaflets and subleaflets. It is devil's walking stick. So it is called that because it has a central woody stem and it has really sharp spines coming in all directions off of that central stem. But then it has these gorgeous bipinnate, I believe, leaves that are huge and these giant collections of flowers, tiny little flowers, but in huge numbers. So here is a male Misenum thynid wasp feeding on the nectar from devil's walking stick flowers. Okay, this is another repeat, and it is goldenrod, solidago. And both of these are female Misenum wasps visiting the flowers of the goldenrod. Okay, now we are moving on to our second group of nesting categories. This is the solitary nesters that use ground nests to create habitat for their eggs and their larvae and for metamorphosis. So females, single females, dig a nest with one or more cells, depending on the species. They're consistent within the species. Each cell within that nest, they provision with prey items, often multiple for each egg. They lay an egg, they seal off that cell. So each cell has an egg and a whole bunch of prey. And then they start provisioning the next cell. And sometimes they'll have multiple nests. Sometimes the nest will have one cell, depending on species. Sometimes the nest will have multiple cells. And they often do have multiple nests. But they're not guarding the nest. They're going out to like feed themselves to get nectar. They are going out to find prey items to paralyze and put into their nest. And another thing to note here is that they are paralyzing their prey. They are not killing the prey, because if they killed the prey, it would start decomposing. And they want that prey to stay alive. So it's nice and fresh for their young after the egg hatches, becomes the larva, and then the larva goes through, you know, a period of days or a few weeks where it is eating the stashed, paralyzed prey. So pretty grim if you're the prey item in this case. But a nice way to keep fresh larder contents if you are the wasp and the young wasp. So here is an example of a wasp species that is a solitary nester and that burrows in the ground. In this case, 1 to 3 cells per nest, and they do multiple nests. And per cell, remember 1 egg per cell, they have 4 to 14 prey items. So these prey items are smaller than the beetle grubs that the other non-nesting species were using. So therefore they need more prey items in order to have enough food resources for their egg and larva. So what they use to provision their young is stink bugs, assassin bugs, leaf-footed bugs, and squash bugs. And the common name of the species is four-banded stink bug hunter. So you can see it is well named. That is a common name that actually works well. So here is a repeat. This is a shrub, a summer blooming shrub. You can also see an early instar of a milkweed assassin bug, and they are a piercing, sucking insect hunter. And you can see the legs in the upper right of another individual of the milkweed assassin bug. So they cannot fly as their immature form, but once they reach their final instar, they do develop wings and they can fly at that point. But in the lower left, feeding on the nectar from this flower, is a four-banded stink bug hunter wasp, a bit of a mouthful, feeding on sweet pepperbush, also known as summer sweet or clethra. My favorite pollinator plant, I really hope that all of you know this species by the end of this talk. This is clustered mountain mint, one of the pycnanthemums. I have planted several different species of pycnanthemum, and this is by far the best one for pollinators for our area. Here we have that milkweed family plant that is not a milkweed, not an Asclepias, that is toxic to us as well as our furry companions, Indian hemp or dogbane. And this is a flower that's just blooming now, just starting to bloom. It has a lovely ferny foliage, but it is not a fern. It is a flowering plant. This is common yarrow. And yarrow is, this species is native to both Europe, excuse me, um, native to both Europe and to North America, but there are different subspecies. And I believe the European one has been diversified through plant breeding into all these different colors. If you get the right plant catalog, you can have like 3 to 5 pages of different colored yarrows. But the wild type, the type that occurs in nature in general, is white with the beautiful yellow pollen on the stamens. Here is a Rudbeckia. I'm not sure which one. This is a Rudbeckia where its petals have been damaged, probably eaten by a caterpillar. But the wasp does not care. The wasp is concerned about accessing the nectar, and you can see that it's also a fresh flower on the inside, even though the petals are damaged. Moving on to another family of wasps, we've got Specidae, or thread-waisted wasps, and this is a common name for the group that is very descriptive, very accurate. The waist, that area between the thorax and the abdomen, is super, super narrow. It's kind of amazing that they can transport everything they need to between those parts of their body. It's such a squeezed in little wasp-waisted structure. So thread-waisted wasps, there are different species. We've got the great golden digger wasp on the left, doused in spotted bee balm pollen, as you see there. And also, there's a whole genus called Ammophila or thread-waisted sand wasps, and we have a few different species here that look very similar in that genus. So first one, the great golden digger wasp. Okay, this is one of my favorites. It is a solitary ground nester. Each female will put 2 to 7 cells per nest and 2 to 6 prey items per cell, and their prey items are pretty big. They provision their nest with katydids and with crickets. So here it is visiting boneset or thoroughwort, which is this fall blooming plant. Here we have a different one of the rattlesnake masters, Arindium, a little bit of that purple blue tinge. And look at this wasp. How cute is that? It's so fuzzy around the head, those giant, adorable eyes, the beautiful pattern of the red, the orange and the golden color and the black. I mean, how can you not fall in love with this wasp? And it's not social. It doesn't have nests with a whole bunch of individuals where some of those individuals are specifically devoted to stinging and scaring away any potential predator of their larvae and eggs and the resources they've so carefully and hardworkingly built for their young. So this is a solitary wasp. The males obviously cannot sting you, no ovipositor, and the females are not at their nest to defend it. They are off gathering nectar for themselves, katydids and crickets for their young. They're just going back and forth, and they are not there to sting you. Here is a cute little woodland wildflower that goes completely dormant in the winter and then comes back with fresh leaves in the spring. And then late summer, it will send up this central flower stalk with multiple flowers, and they look kind of like paintbrushes, the petals on those flowers. Lots of pollinators love these little paintbrushy flowers. This is elephant's foot. We have at least 2 species of elephant's foot here. One is more leafy than the other. Here is a familiar one. We've seen this a few times already. See if you can remember. There is the spiky butt of a fly in the lower right. So there are pollinating flies as well as pollinating wasps. And you see our great golden digger wasp up higher, and the plant is musky mint. Then we have the feature plant or the feature photo for this species. Um, I love how much pollen the stamen of the spotted bee balm deposits on the back and head of pollinators when they go in to reach the nectar at the base of that tube. It's just very generous with its pollen, and it's really fun watching the furry pollinators come out of there just doused. And then, when they're visiting the next flower on another plant of the same species, the pistil can actually, dab down and grab some of that pollen to enable pollination and fertilization of the eggs of that plant so that it can reproduce with another member of its species. But super fun to see pollinators carrying around the pollen. My favorite pollinator plant, clustered mountain mint. This is the one that we saw in the bog at Carolina Bay in Francis Marion, and it is tall pine barren milkwort. And here's a face front view of very important genus of plants, the goldenrods. And milkweeds are not just for butterflies. So this is a great golden digger wasp sipping nectar from a butterfly milkweed plant. And here you can see, like, check out those feet. How cute is that? So they've got kind of forked little feet, all these different joints in their legs. When you do photography of insects, it's really delightful to be able to see features that are too small, at least for my naked eye, to observe. And you're not having to capture the insect, you're not having to kill the insect. You can just zoom in with a good lens and really see so much more detail when you're observing the photo on your computer and you zoom in a bit. So really enjoy the fuzzy little ankles and the forked little feet that it's using to stabilize itself as it's sucking nectar from that milkweed flower. You can also see the antennae are jointed, and often for Hymenoptera, the males will have an extra unit of their antennae, and that is specifically devoted to detecting pheromones, which are the same species sex-attracting hormones that are released into the air, volatile chemicals. And so the males, their single purpose is basically feed themselves and mate. So it's very important for them to be able to detect the female of the species to accomplish that second goal. And they have special structure on their antennae to detect those pheromones. Okay, here, Debbie, actually at Caw in the little garden with the bird feeder, observed this and called me over to take a look. And I was so excited because the solitary wasps, since they're not really hanging around their nests very often, it can be hard to find their nests. So this is a great golden digger wasp, a female, visiting her nest. Okay, moving on to that other group of thread-waisted wasps. This is still family Specidae, but specifically the genus Ammophila, the thread-waisted sand wasps. They just do one cell per nest in their ground burrows, but they do multiple nests. And they provision their nests with caterpillars. And generally, each species of Ammophila will specialize on a specific moth family for caterpillars to provision their young. So they're not overlapping in their food needs with other species of Ammophila. So here is this shrub, the summer blooming shrub, summer sweet or sweet pepper bush. So lots of wasps love to visit this, as well as bees. This is vine that I often see on tidal creeks, which is the climbing hemp vine. This is that mint that is musky smelling, apparently. I really need to sniff this and confirm whether that common name is accurate or not. Musky mint. And my all-time favorite pollinator plant, clustered mountain mint. So check out the racing stripes on the thorax of this thread-waisted wasp. That is one of the diagnostic things that you can tell different species with. And you can also see the wasps have mandibles, which they use for chewing, and then they have kind of a sucking tube mouth part for slurping up nectar. So you can see the mandibles kind of poking into the blossom there, but there's a little straw-like structure as well that is in between the mandibles. Here we have, you can't see the black flecks as well here, but this is the salt and pepper plant, also known as snow square stem. That is not a mint, but is an aster, fall blooming, large plant. This is a very tall plant that is spectacular when it's in bloom. It only blooms about 3 or 4 weeks in the summer. But when it's blooming, it's gorgeous and very popular with pollinators. It also has very cool architecture as an overall plant. It has this kind of tubular central stem with rings of elongate leaves coming out from the nodes. And yeah, very attractive plant. This is Joe Pyeweed, Eutrochium. Another aster. This is Elliot's aster. This is one of the late blooming ones. And another eryngium, another rattlesnake master. Then we've got the plant that is called blue, but to my eyes is purple. In the mint family, the blue mist flower. This is a different black-eyed Susan. This black-eyed Susan can be 8 feet tall. It likes wet shade. It's kind of a stream floodplain or a river floodplain species. Cutleaf coneflower. So looks very different from most of the black-eyed Susans that we're familiar with in the Rudbeckia genus. And you can eat its spring foliage. The Cherokee called it sochan, and it was one of their favorite spring greens to eat, the basil rosette. This plant is evergreen, but the most palatable time of year to harvest the greens is in the early spring when fresh growth is occurring near the base. This one blooms in August, late summer, and it sends a very tall stalk and has a cluster of flowers that have that characteristic aster structure. Okay, here is another Rudbeckia, the orange coneflower, much shorter species, also evergreen at the basal rosette. And one of our favorites, a fall bloomer, goldenrod. Okay, now we are moving on to a different category of solitary nesting pollinating wasps. These are cavity nesters. So they are looking for existing structures, or they're building their own structures that have a cavity. They're not in the ground in order to create a safe place for their eggs and to provision those eggs and future larvae with food. So here are a couple of examples in the family Vespidae, subfamily Eumenidae. Potter and mason wasps. So on the left, we've got the fraternal potter wasp. On the right, we've got the red-marked Pachydineris wasp. So first one, the fraternal potter wasp, its name is pretty descriptive, and you'll see why. So it constructs a nest out of mud, and that nest is in the form of a pot. And just one cell per nest, one cell per pot, one egg per pot, with multiple nests. And they provision their nest specifically with caterpillars from the moth family Geometridae, which is a very abundant family of moths. So here you can see the wasp gathering mud and a series of pots, each one with one egg and multiple prey items of the caterpillar. So she creates a pot, lays the egg, or provisions it, usually provisions the paralyzed prey, paralyzed caterpillars in there, lays the egg, seals off the pot, creates another pot, repeat. And so that bottom one you can see is the most recent creation, and she has not yet sealed it off, so she probably hasn't yet fully provisioned it and laid her egg. And then the young, so the egg will hatch into a caterpillar, the larva of the wasp will feed on the caterpillars of the moth, and then the wasp will form a cocoon inside of the pot and go through metamorphosis. And then once it emerges from its cocoon as an adult wasp, it will bore a hole through the pot, and you'll be able to see that it is an empty pot because there is that hole in it. Once again, it's not sealed off anymore. So here is the weed. This is one of our native weeds in this group, the smartweed. You can see it at Kaka in the marsh, freshwater marsh specifically. Favorite pollinator plant, clustered mountain mint. And one of our fall blooming plants, boneset or thoroughwort, Eupatorium. And once again, Elliot's aster. So all the pollinators come to this plant because it's like the only one that's blooming in late November, early December. So it's a great place to just stand with your camera and wait for pollinators to show up. Another rattlesnake master. And moving on to another group. So this is still Vespidae, still Eumenidae. This is the Pachydineris wasp, which is actually, the mouthful is the genus name. They don't really have an easier to pronounce common name for this one yet, but maybe someday. So this, instead of building that beautiful pot structure that our potter wasp did, this wasp uses pre-existing cavities. So they are specifically looking for a cavity that has a diameter of 4 to 6 millimeters. They use hollow stems and they use tunnels in wood. They don't create those tunnels, but they will use tunnels that were made by beetle larvae if they are the right diameter. And they provision their nests with caterpillars. So here we see a stem of a marsh plant being investigated as a possible cavity nest. And here we have a familiar vine. This is climbing hemp vine. And an aster, specifically frost aster. So this is the one that can have thousands of blooms in a single plant and is evergreen, very large cluster of basal leaves in the winter. Here is a plant that is native to our area and is related to a more colorful version of this plant known as poinsettia. So this is wild poinsettia, euphorbia. So both poinsettias are in the euphorbia genus, and specifically euphorbia cyathophora. This is a cute little plant that quite a few pollinators are attracted to. And I believe it's an annual. It tends to grow in clusters. I've seen it growing in sandy habitats under pine trees, but pretty adaptable and really fun to see that the flower structures are not very showy, but once again, the bracts underneath the flowers are the more showy feature that attracts your eye. Here we have another rattlesnake master. Here we have another umbel, and this umbel is a non-native. It is dill, but in the family Apiaceae, which we do have native members of here in coastal South Carolina. And then once again, we have our orange coneflower, one of the black-eyed Susans. This is a perennial species with evergreen basal rosette. And our very familiar late summer, early fall bloomer, goldenrod. Okay, so here we get to the pollinating stinging wasps that are a little bit harder to love because these are the social nesters. So it's not just one female building a nest, going back and forth, provisioning, laying eggs, all that stuff. This is a colony, and some of the members of that colony are devoted to defending their nest, and they will defend their nest from you even if you accidentally come upon that nest. Some species are more aggressively defensive than others, so they'll determine that kind of diameter or radius from the nest that they will become active defenders. But here we have Vespidae still, but this is not subfamily Eumenidae. This is Pollinating, the paper wasps. So I see a lot of paper wasps visiting flowers, pollinating flowers, drinking nectar, and they build an exposed comb of cells that is attached to an object with a pedicel. So a pedicel is like this little narrow, really sturdy attachment. And instead of something like a hornet's nest where it's wrapped in kind of a paper product so you can't see the comb, with the paper wasp, you can actually see the exposed cells and see the females maintaining the young that are in the cells. So they make these nests out of chewed wood fiber and chewed plant stalks that they mix with saliva. So it's an impressive construction that they're doing. It's pretty darn cool architecturally. And instead of paralyzing prey and then putting it with an egg, this is a colony that is actively maintained through the warm season. Multiple generations of workers are helping to maintain the nest. So they are actually actively feeding the young, and they don't have a paralyzed prey item. They have masticated or chewed pieces of dead caterpillars that they're feeding to their young through time. So because there's a colony, you can have subdivision of labor. So you have the individuals who are foraging for food, individuals foraging for wood pulp and water, individuals who are caring for the larvae, and individuals defending their nest with their stingers. So these are all females. There's the queen, and then there's the worker females. Okay, so here is an example. This is a small paper wasp nest that was in my vegetable garden attached to a basil plant, actually. And this was a very well-behaved nest because I was weeding underneath this plant when I spotted it. So I was like, my face was within 1.5 feet of this nest. And they started vibrating their wings, but they did not come at me. So I was able to gently and quietly back up and then return with my camera so I can take a picture. But you can see that pedicel, which is the attachment on the underside of the leaf, right around where the vein is in the upper central area. And then there's kind of this umbrella structure. Umbrella wasps, umbrella paper wasps is another name for this group. And where it's just a set of those paper-based or the wood fiber and stem fiber and saliva-based cells that each contains a egg and then larva and then get sealed off for metamorphosis. So here is an example of another umbrella paper wasp nest. This one's in Francis Marion attached to a St. John's wort shrub in a marshy area. These guys were a little more aggressive. They were paying attention to me and kind of warning me off as well. And I kept a more polite distance. I was not trying to weed in the national forest, so I was not leaning over with my face right in their nest, which was good. Familiar plant, so different wasp, but same plant that we have seen many times. This is musky mint. This is my favorite pollinator plant, Western mountain mint. And another early blooming tree. That's an important pollen and nectar source. In the case of wasps, just nectar, but in the case of bees, both pollen and nectar. So this is willow, and specifically prairie willow, which is more of an upland species. And it is suckering. So it goes kind of horizontally instead of vertically to spread. And I have one in my yard, and I love watching the pollinators visit its flowers, generally early March of every year or late February. Here's another umbel. So in the Apiaceae family, I'm not so good at identifying, possibly cowbane. Here is the New Jersey plant that is also native here, the New Jersey tea, Ceanothus. Here we have a tree that kind of looks like summer sweet or coastal pepperbush, but this tree is actually swamp tie or TT or Cyrilla. Swamp Cyrilla is another name for it. And it is a semi-evergreen tree, tends to grow in swamps, thus the name, in floodplains around freshwater tidal rivers. And very attractive plant in bloom. And just like overall its form, I like this plant when I see it in natural areas. Here is a cutely named plant that is a low-growing wildflower in swampy habitats known as Barbara's buttons. Marshallia is the genus. And here's another milkweed. This is our most important milkweed species in the South Carolina coastal plain in terms of feeding the caterpillars of monarchs. We have abundantly occurring natural milkweed without the need to plant milkweed. This is aquatic milkweed, Asclepias perennis, very, very common in the river bottoms and swamps of the coastal plain. And pollinators like the flowers as well, not just monarch caterpillars eating the leaves. Here we have an aggressively spreading, deliciously scented mint family plant that is native in Florida and I believe in Georgia as well, and simply the very southeastern corner of South Carolina. I planted this in my yard. I bought a little 4-inch pot, and it now is taking over like a 20 by 30 area of my yard. Every time my husband mows, smells delicious. He has mixed feelings about it. I love it. It blooms pretty much any time that we have warm weather. It's evergreen. It's just a cute little ground cover, just a very aggressively spreading little ground cover. It is called Brown's Savory. And once again, we have our local relative of the Christmas plant, the wild poinsettia, which is a euphorbia. And the very tall, spectacularly blooming for about 3 or 4 weeks in the summer, Joe Pyeweed. And our late summer, early fall, goldenrod. Okay, so that is the last page of our like specific wasp species with different nesting strategies. We're going to talk a little bit about overwintering strategies at this point. So for our social nesters, they overwinter as mated females with the sperm stored in the spermatheca organ, and the ovaries do not develop until spring. So there's no fertilization of the egg and the sperm until months after the mating occurs. They're called the future foundresses. So these are mated females that are going to found a new nest in the spring. During the winter, they take shelter in natural cavities. So this can include, under a tree bark, in or under logs, in former rodent burrows, in hollow plant stems. So wherever there is shelter, they will seek it out and spend the brutal part of winter there. And then whenever it's warm, they'll come out and forage for food and then go hide away again when it gets cold. The solitary nesters, they overwinter in their cocoon stage, and they have a stage that's specifically called pre-pupal diapause. So the larva goes through its instars, and just so you know, an instar, as an insect, they have the exoskeleton as opposed to like our internal skeleton, and so that external layer of themselves is what's providing the structural support, and they cannot grow and expand that exoskeleton. So as they are eating and becoming larger, they need to shed that exoskeleton and then harden a new exoskeleton as they are larger. So every time they shed that exoskeleton, they're progressing to another instar. And each species has a certain number of instars between the egg hatching and the cocoon spinning stage. It's usually about 5 instars, I think. I'm not an expert on that. But for the overwintering solitary nesters, the larva spins a cocoon and then pauses for months until the spring environmental cues trigger the beginning of metamorphosis, so the changing of the tissues inside the cocoon to the adult form. And solitary wasps can be univoltine, meaning that they have one generation per year. They can be bivoltine, meaning they have 2 generations per year, or multivoltine, 3 or more generations per year. So only if they are bivoltine or multivoltine, only the final generation of the year goes into prepupal diapause. The spring and summer generations would just go straight from spinning the cocoon into going through metamorphosis to become the adult. Okay, so here are examples of univoltine species and multivoltine species and what they look like on iNaturalist, where you're looking at the months of the year across the x-axis along the bottom of the graph, and on the y-axis is the number of observations of that wasp in each month. So on the left, you can see a univoltine species, 1 generation per year, and people generally only see wasps when they're in their adult stage. They don't see the eggs, they don't see the larvae, they don't see the cocoons, because all of those are in the nest. That's like underground with the grub. It's underground in nests. It's in the cute little pot that is made by the potter wasp. It is in the stems or cavities that are found and utilized to make nests, or in the paper, beautiful umbrella paper wasp nest. So the univoltine species are all solitary, and they have 1 generation per year, and there's a peak period for the abundance of the adult of that species, and then they're out of sight, out of mind for people for the rest of the year. On the right-hand side, you see a multivoltine species. So people are observing this species every month of the year, and more so generally in the fall, because there's been more reproduction by that point. But you can see them any month of the year as the adult. So examples on the left, we've got the noble scoleid wasp, which is just 1 generation per year, and peak in July, most abundant adults then, but quite a few out there in June and August as well. And it depends on what latitude you are, how far up or down the coast you're in when that peak will occur. And then the multi-voting example is red-marked pachydinerus wasps. They just are constantly reproducing, building nests, going through metamorphosis all months of the year. Okay, so one last thing we're going to talk about is something called a pollination syndrome. So that is a set of floral traits that have evolved together in a plant to attract specific types of pollinators. So generally, a plant wants to attract a group of pollinators that is likely to visit another flower of the same type. So they successfully have pollination and fertilization and produce the next generation of that plant. So for plants that are trying to attract wasps to accomplish this pollination, those plants tend to have this group of floral traits. They are white, greenish, or yellow, often with UV guidance because wasps and bees can see in the UV ultraviolet range of the electromagnetic spectrum. So they can see past blue and purple, past violet. And so we can't see that, but there's like often like a little landing target on a flower that's in reflected UV light that tells the wasp where to go to find the nectar. And so the petals of the flower, white, greenish, or yellow, is typical for a wasp pollinated plant. In terms of scent, the scent of the flower tends to be pungent or musky. So it's not a sweet sort of scent that you would have, say, for a butterfly. It has abundant nectar and shallow and easily accessible nectar because they don't have a long tongue. So they have to be able to reach their short little tongue and access the nectar to want to visit that flower over and over again to help with the pollination. And in terms of the structure of the flower, as we saw in many examples, they like the open flowers, like the flat flowers, the short tubular flowers, because they have the short tongues, or umbels, which have very accessible nectar as well. So pollination syndrome for wasp pollinated flowers, pale in color, pungent musky scent, easily and abundantly accessible nectar, and flowers that have a structure that facilitate short-tongued insect accessing the nectar. So which plants are these? These are the plants that we saw over and over again, where wasps are overrepresented in terms of the percentage that you're seeing on those plants relative to their overall abundance in my 3,000 pollinator observations on iNaturalist. And bees are underrepresented for these species. So smartweed, musky mint, swamp tie-tie, New Jersey tea, spotted bee balm, bonesetts or thoroughworts, snow square stem, carrot family, so the umbelliferous flowers, rattlesnake master, and dogbane. So those are flowers that have evolutionarily developed their flower structures to appeal to wasps. And those are the species that we saw over and over again in this presentation for that reason. So here we are checking in on the status of my not so secret mission. Have you started falling in love with South Carolina's wasps? If not with all of them, perhaps at least the solitary nesting ones. And did you learn to recognize and name any new to you South Carolina native wildflowers? I hope so. So if I have now hooked you on pollinating wasps, I highly recommend this beautiful book by Heather Holm. It is like a coffee table book for those of us who are interested in cool critters. Gorgeous photography, great information, well organized. A guide for Eastern North American wasps by Heather Holm. So highly recommend. And if you would like to purchase native plants to add habitat value and beneficial wasps to your yard, I have a business called Native Plants to the People. It is based in the Charleston area here, James Island specifically. And you can order through my website for picking up on my driveway. And also I sell at events such as the Native Plant Society sale this past weekend and Plantasia, which is a big event taking place at the Mount Pleasant Farmers Market, I think April 11th. So if you live elsewhere in the state, the South Carolina Native Plant Society's website has the South Carolina Native Plant Nursery page. And also I want to advertise Roots and Shoots Nursery. It has like a brick and mortar store. My store is my house and it's only available by pre-order and pickup. So Roots and Shoots Nursery is another excellent place in the Charleston area, specifically West Ashley, to get native plants. And finally, if you are interested in getting some Master Naturalist volunteer hours by helping to plant native plants in public areas, this Friday, so 2 days from now, there is an opportunity to plant a brand new 1,600 square foot native plant garden in the city of Charleston Park. This is a garden that I designed that is co-sponsored by the Green Heart Project and the Marsh Project, and the South Carolina Native Plant Society also awarded this project a grant. We will be planting hundreds of native plants this Friday afternoon at Mitchell Playground. Feel free to stay afterwards. I can give you more details if you're interested in any of these opportunities. Coming up just a couple days after that, on Sunday, March 29th, also at 1 p.m. in Park Circle, Quarterman Park is a City of North Charleston park, and they are giving organizations the opportunity to adopt small areas of the park to put in gardens. So the South Carolina Native Plant Society has adopted a section, and we will be planting native plants there Sunday at 1. And finally, although I'm sure there will be many more opportunities, including at Kawkaw, the Ashley River Park, which is a newer park up past Middleton Place. There's a Clemson pollinator gardening workshop. I think it's like $20 or $25. But from 8 to 12 a.m., you will learn about pollinator gardening and have a chance to plant a pollinator garden in this park. It's April 8th, starting from 8 a.m. and I think wrapping up at noon. So 3 opportunities to learn and plant and help create habitat for beneficial pollinating wasps and other pollinators. So with that, I would love to answer any questions that you may have.
I'm just going to jump in real quick and say, Sharleen, thank you. We'll definitely do questions. For these 3 opportunities, I'm also happy to send them out to our larger group. But are all of them you to touch base, or if you have particular people that people should be reaching out to get more information, if you want to send that to me and I can get that out to our larger member.
I will send it to you. So
Perfect.
For the Quarterman Park, there is a link to register for the Native Plant Society.
Okay.
The registration closes Friday afternoon, I think. So
Okay.
you have a little bit of time to register.
I can get it out tomorrow morning. Yep.
I will send you the deets.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sharleen. All right. I'm gonna open it and let people ask their questions. And then if the questions that are in the chat don't get asked, I will jump in and do that. So feel free to unmute and jump in with your questions. Anybody? Okay.
I'm not scary.
Not at all. Okay. I'll start with this one. Let's see. Okay. How long does the paralytic effect last? Is it long enough for the larvae to develop? Does the larvae stay on the grub for long? This is going back earlier in your talk.
So generally the paralytic lasts for the entire life of that insect that is the prey item. And generally the egg stage is only 5 to 7 days, depending on the temperature. The warmer it is, the faster the development of the embryo in the egg, and then it will hatch sooner in a warmer day than a cooler season. So 5 to 7 days is fairly typical for an egg. So the larvae has been, or the prey item has been paralyzed for that entire period, and then the egg hatches, and then the wasp larva starts feeding on it, and then it's usually 2 weeks-ish that the larva is feeding and then molting and being in another instar and then feeding and growing some more and doing that about 5 times. And then they've eaten all their food. They've eaten all that paralyzed insect and sometimes paralyzed spider. And then they will form their cocoon and either go straight into metamorphosis if it's still the worm season, or do the prepupal diapause if they're in the winter stage waiting for spring. So those insects never really have a chance to move again. They're paralyzed for the rest of their life. It's brutal.
Thank you for that. Another question was, what are the reasons for mountain mint being your all-time favorite native plant?
Okay, so I am an iNaturalist nut. I absolutely am obsessed with taking pictures of pollinators and organizing those observations on iNaturalist. And so I have created a database. I've downloaded that data as a CSV file and analyzed the data. And mountain mint has more pollinator species visiting it than any other native plant species I've observed. So over 80 species of pollinators just in my James Island yard have visited that plant. So it has a long bloom period. It's like 2.5 to 3 months. Many native plants, they bloom for 3 to 4 weeks. So it's a longer bloom period, and just the diversity of pollinators and the abundance of pollinators that visit it, it's spectacular.
Thank you. That's great. And then this was directed towards when I think you were talking about the paper wasps. So these look really different. Are there a bunch of different paper wasp, or just is it variable?
So there are many species of paper wasps in the genus Polistes. So I was giving you multiple examples of different species in that genus.
Great. All right. And then Harry posted a picture and said, "How long should we keep these bamboo bee houses from last summer?"
Ah, okay. So if they were used, you should see kind of a coated over end where the cell has been sealed off. And once that sealed off area has been bored through from the inside, then you know that it is that the larva has metamorphosed and has come out as an adult and is done. Now, will warn you, the Xerces Society, which is the nonprofit organization for insect conservation, they kind of recommend against using this sort of habitat and instead providing natural nesting opportunities. There are a few reasons for this. One of them is when you have unnaturally dense aggregations of nesting without kind of that colonial thing where you have defenders, you get buildups of parasitic organisms, you get more predators coming in. So it's not like isolated little nests hidden around. And you can just build up more and more parasites over years. So they do recommend if you have one of these, you need long enough stalks that they can have multiple cells in each one, and you need to clean them intermittently in order to kill any parasitic organisms. And you need to make sure to clean them when there aren't actual like larval pollinators in there. So in general, I recommend having, ground nesting opportunities. These are cavity nesters. So they're looking for stems. They're looking for like rotten wood that has little boreholes from beetle larvae and that sort of thing. So try to produce natural nesting sources rather than creating these artificially densely aggregated nesting habitats in order to maximize the survival of young bees and wasps that are cavity nesting species.
Thank you. And then we have lots of thank yous and great information, just and how valuable the information was. And then we come down to a question that says, how much sun does mountain mint need?
Okay, so mountain mint is pretty adaptable. I grow it in a large patch where it gets about 4 to 6 hours of sun. I think it really enjoys that amount. I also have it in a place where the downspout of one of my gutters feeds it with water. So it's pretty adaptable. It can probably do full sun, especially if the soil is a little bit more moist. It doesn't want like super dry. If you have super dry, sandy soil, I would say plant spotted bee balm instead of mountain mint. But if you have part sun, which is like 4 to 7 hours of sun, and you have some moisture in your soil, some organic matter in your soil, it is an excellent choice. I will say it's a mint. It spreads by underground runners, but I particularly have it in my yard in a fairly large patch because I love the plant. And I put edging around it, and then I mow. We have a little bit of turf grass around it. So we just kind of keep it contained. And it is not like culinary mint, which will just infest your lawn. It basically stays in that edged area that we mow around. I wouldn't plant it with well-behaved little plants because it will completely overgrow those well-behaved little plants. So have well-behaved plant gardens and aggressive plant gardens. And this deserves its own space. I grow a button bush in there. I have some clethra, which is the summer sweet or sweet pepper bush. There's a little bit of mountain mint that gets in there sometimes. I have swamp crinum lily. But these are all plants that can kind of stand up for themselves. Do not plant like little Stokes aster or little well-behaved fleabanes or something like that. They will get outcompeted. But a great plant. I think every gardener who has the right conditions should grow this plant, especially if you are a naturalist and love watching a high diversity of pollinators come visit the flowers. And it smells great. So every mint species, every species in the mint family has a different mix of essential oils. And so I love the aromatherapy of visiting plants and like ripping open a leaf and sniffing it. And it's like a mood enhancement. So this is one that has a nice scent. Some people say that they'll make tea out of it. I prefer other mint species for teas, but I like the scent. Nice mix of essential oils. And it's deer resistant. So pretty much all mints, because of those essential oils, are a good plant to plant if you have an overabundance of deer in your yard.
Okay. So last questions around mountain mint. One, will it grow in a container? And two, is mountain mint in South Carolina the same that's found in Maine with the same name?
Yes, but if you dug up a little chunk from Maine and you brought it down here, it probably wouldn't do so well. So you can have the same species that is locally adapted. So there are local populations of that species. Yeah. So same species, they could interbreed, but probably best adapted to a geographic area that's like a few states, not the whole coast. And I think you had another question related to
Container.
that.
Can it grow in a container?
Container, right. Okay, so pretty much all mints, they will need to be divided each year if you grow it in a container because the pot will just become thoroughly filled with roots. So it will grow in a container, do a large container, and then every spring kind of cut it in half or cut it in quarters and put just 1/4 of the root ball in that same pot and then give some to friends or have more pots or put it in the ground somewhere.
Charlene, thank you. There's lots of thank yous and how wonderful this was. We really appreciate it. It's amazing information and
Pleasure.
multiple faceted of what we got to learn. So thank you. I will share out that information that Charlene has shared with us in volunteer opportunities. I've also put a link in. Debbie just posted another opportunity to garden at Caw. So if anybody has any questions about it, just let us know and we'll get you the information. Thank you so much all for being on tonight with us and enjoy and happy spring. And Charlene, thank you again, truly, very much. We really appreciate
Happy
it.
to share. Thanks for coming tonight.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye.